If you are just joining us, welcome to the Viva's live streams where we're showcasing the voices and talents of vegan women from across the globe. Everything is recorded, so if you have just joined us and you've missed this, you can watch it again, and I highly encourage you to do that. So the next part of our Viva's live stream, Viva's is our global community and media brand for vegan women. We have got Nivi Jaswal. Nivi is a powerhouse. She's quite the force of nature. Nivi is, her background is corporate. She's got experience in CPG, marketing, media, research, strategy. She brings a wealth of experience from many years, and she has her own non-profit organization, the Virsa Foundation, and some really important JIVINITI research where she is bringing in a whole mix of people from anthropologists, psychologists, filmmakers, animal rights activists, lifestyle medicine, and really bringing all that together in an intersectional approach. Nivi is going to be tackling a very interesting topic, and it's called Gatherers Over Hunters, and it's all about how our food systems have historically prioritized meat and masculinity, and Nivi's going to be looking at that, examining that, and asking the question, how can we put forward a more plant-based approach? So without further ado, please welcome Nivi Jaswal.
Hi, Katrina. Good morning from Boston. And I reckon it's good afternoon for you guys. I am just trying to figure out how do I share my slide. Okay. I'm going to need some help. And yes, absolutely. So thank you so much, Global Veg Fest. Awesome opportunity. We're going to jump right into it. Gatherers over hunters, how war and patriarchy shaped human culinary history. Can we have the next slide, please? Just a disclaimer, I'm not a misandrist. You know, I believe there's a role for both the divine feminine and divine masculine in each of us. This talk, though, is a critique on how our definition and expression of masculinity might have led us into a whole lot of trouble. Next slide. We're going to be talking about some masculine tropes or stereotypes or profiles that have been crafted in order to advance what I call Carnistic colonialism and lord over access to food, wealth, and power. Now, bear in mind, not all these profiles are created equal. While all of them are linked and they build upon each other, some have actively played a role in designing ones preceding them. And in other words, some of these stereotypes are factual, historical, and real, while some others are merely fictions created out of what I call Carnistic colonialistic agenda. Next slide, please. We'll go over to our hypothesis. The modern nutritional emphasis on meat and its connection to masculinity is an outcome of storytelling that is fueled by the military animal industrial complex that is inherently colonial and carnist in nature. Next. And, you know, some definitions and doctrines, the dots that we will be connecting today. Carnistic colonialism, Dominionistic Darwinism, a lot of isms out there, right? Speciesism, racism, misogyny. These are, so to speak, the bedrock on which the military animal industrial complex was seeded, was born. It was called out for the first time in 1961. It was taken inspiration from by an anthropologist called Barbara Nosk, and she spoke about animal industrial complex. But today we're actually going to talk about warfare. We're going to talk about men and you know, masculinity and all of those things, and how what I call the MAIC, the military animal industrial complex, leverages that to create the situation of public health crises and planetary health crises we have on our hands just now. The next slide, please. All right, so what's the definition? Let's look at the definition. Very important. The military animal industrial complex refers to a partially opaque network of relations between all of these agencies, governments, military, public, private science, corporate agriculture sector, and obviously big food. And within these, there is sustained an ideology that naturalizes that it's okay and it's normal and it's natural for humans to eat other animals. And it encompasses an extraordinarily wide range of practices, markets, even identities and symbolism, and it has a global footprint economically and most unfortunately psychosocially. So we're going to deep dive into this in just a moment. Next slide. This is how it works. It selectively designs, processes, packages, sells, and even brands for superiority and domination, such that, when we wear and eat and consume these brands, we feel like we've arrived. It creates an aspiration. And whatever goes through it, it does it all with precision, and it does it at scale. It's en masse. It's almost like an assembly line manufacturing. In fact, it is all of that and more. Next slide. So what are we going to focus on today? The bigger cards that you see, those of the colonizer, slave owner, soldier, and Superman. These are basically profiles that have offered a specific interpretation of human history that has tended to promote their agenda. And they continue to do so. And that has defined our food system and down to what our definition and idea of nutrition and health are. When you look at the game changer trope, which is to the bottom right-hand side, it's in resistance of the military animal industrial complex. On top of it, when you look at the slaughterhouse worker, the slaughterhouse worker, you see that unfortunate trope as an outcome of this complex. And what you see on the far left are the largely fictional tropes around how early humans lived and whether the Neolithic agricultural revolution was a massive success and so on. So it's all about laying down certain foundational narratives for exploitation of animals, human trafficking, oppression of women, systemic racism, and ultimately zoonotic pandemics and climate change. Now, it would take a lot for us to go through all the cards involved in this game. So we will investigate just a select few. Next slide, please. So our journey today is going to go through British India and the seeds that it sowed, unfortunately, of Carnistic colonialism. We'll then go over to Cold War America and look at all the tropes they amplified to promote eating meat and, and trying to teach us what primitive humans were all about. And then we'll get on to World War II and look at how branded junk food has become a global public health malaise. Next slide. First, man the colonizer. An empire built on international trade, the Industrial Revolution, and nobody would have guessed, Carnistic colonialism. Next. Now, what's interesting is when the East India Company was formed, and later on when India as a colony or large parts of South Asia as colonies passed under the control of the British Crown, all previous invader rulers stayed on, assimilated, adapted, and eventually embraced places where they went to as their motherland, not just India, but others too. However, as we do know, that the East India Company had no such intent. Their presence grew to become trading posts, and then you see man the colonizer and man the soldier and man the priest. All of those tropes arrive, one after the other. And ultimately, the entire landscape was redesigned for mass production for export of certain choice products using slave labor from the natives. Next, please. What could be more sinister than Carnism? And I really, really, really encourage a lot of our white Caucasian vegans out there to look at this a little closely. There is something that is more sinister than Carnism, and that is Carnistic colonialism. As an anthropologist and as a researcher, Marek Muller, talks about in their book, they say, Carnism is not merely carnism, but rather carnistic colonialism, an ideology and discourse of edibility that favors Western, industrialized, capitalistic modes of animal production and consumption situated within transnational histories of coloniality, heteropatriarchy, and white supremacy. Next, please. And when we actually look at some of the things that have been said, this is supposedly a revered Jesuit missionary, Abbe Jean-Antoine Dubois, and he said, "Ahimsa is a cowardly and an effeminate doctrine." Next. This is how the colonizers' table looked like. It actually created in India what's called the Anglo-Indian cuisine. And Britain was the heaviest consumer of meat in Europe at the time. There is something written out here in a book called Meat, Mercy, and Morality. I highly recommend you check it out. And it lists out an array of meat that was consumed at Anglo-Indian breakfasts: crumb chops, brain cutlets, beef rissoles, deviled kidneys, and a whole lot more. Next. And when we look at this Carnist ostentation, it was deployed as the cultural marker of a masculine, physically superior British Raj. And oftentimes, they even blamed the climate for stomach disorders and gastrointestinal illness. But actually, we believe that it might have been that mutton chop and potentially the Indian tonic water or the alcohol in Gilbey's gin. Next, please. And when we look at the legacy that the empire started to plant in India, they actually created the first ever military dairy farms in the country in 1886. In 1914, the first ever census, livestock census, was held. And by the time it was 1920, there were training centers that were created for defense dairy farms to be managed on scientific lines. We all know what that science is. It's all about importing Jersey, Holstein, and heifer cows, artificial insemination, and the rest is history. Next. And policy-induced famine and malnutrition paved the way for a narrative that is not just for India, but also for large tracts, many countries of the global south, that really talks about the need to create health and nutrition based on an animal-based protein. Next, please. So while we see that all of these narratives around deficient India, deficient Latin America, deficient Africa were created, we fast forward and we look into Cold War America, when there was this massive hunt for trying to figure out what the human nature really was about. And a lot of anthropologists and bioarchaeologists got together, and they started to define what was the underpinning of human evolutionary success. And within that, we're going to look into the tropes of man the hunter, man the farmer. Next, please. Now, the 5-line short story on how meat and masculinity fit in with the milestones of human success were offered to us as follows. And a lot of us tend to believe this even to this day. I encourage you to start looking at this pyramid downwards up. So the story started with hunting. Yes, we were hunters, we were fishermen, and the men would go out wearing all this fur while the women would stay behind. We tamed fire so we could cook and eat meat. And when we ate meat, it led to the development of a bigger brain. And then we were able to lord over, become the paragon of all animals, and started taming wildlife for labor, meat, dairy, clothing. And finally, agriculture. Oh my goodness, that amazing Neolithic agricultural revolution that created food security for all. Next, please. How did this start? 1966, University of Chicago. 75 anthropologists got together and they put forward Man the Hunter, a theory. It said, hunting, a masculine-coded activity, was humanity's original source of livelihood, and it must be considered central to human development. And they said, women's work, gathering, foraging, was evolutionarily unimportant. Next, please. It wasn't until 40 years from that time that Donna L. Hart and Robert W. Sussman in 2006 challenged that. And they said, we have genomic evidence and we have fossil evidence and we have dental fossil evidence that actually resulted in an amazing book that was titled as Man the Hunted. Early man may have hunted, but was not a hunter. He may have scavenged, but was not a scavenger. Humans evolved mainly as a plant-eating species that ate some animal protein collected opportunistically. And humans are no more born to be hunters than to be gardeners. And if they couldn't eat meat, why would they hunt? That was a big question. All right, next, please. 2009, Richard Wrangham, a British primatologist based out of Harvard, came up with something even more amazing. And he said, the bigger body and the brain, smaller gut, smaller teeth, compared to ancestors and who came before, had nothing to do with meat. We are more vegetarian cooks, more than carnivores. And all of these amazing developments happened primarily because of cooking vegetables like tubers. Highly recommend check that book up. It's really, really amazing book, very slim and a fast read. Next. So now we have new evidence, bases all of this research, that for over 200,000 years, pre-agricultural humans were actually a picture of egalitarianism, simplicity, and an affluence, which is described in a really different kind of a way. It basically tells us that early humans were predominantly foragers, living peacefully, eating a highly varied, predominantly plant-based diet, and that gatherer-hunter cultures were more matrilocal and had a greater spirit of Ubuntu, and they were less prone to organized warfare and able to offer even a more loving livelihood, a loving childhood to their children and a peaceful livelihood to all around. Next, please. So what about man the farmer? When we look at war epidemiologists, and yes, there is somebody called a war epidemiologist, archaeobiologists and paleopathologists, in fact, at Durham University in the UK. They've identified several periods of transition in human history that have had huge impact on public health. And they said farming was one such epidemiological transition, and it actually seeded lack of diversity in diet and therefore zoonotic infections, starvation, malnutrition, easy spread of infections, and most of all, patriarchy, gender-based coding, and finally, organized warfare. Therefore, seeding what we call the military animal industrial complex. Next, please. Now, fast forward, we're getting into man the soldier. This is when military animal industrial complex goes multinational. And the military, if you didn't know, is the largest funder of the food research in the United States. Next, please. We're going to breeze through these slides now. World War II made lower nutrition standards actually a little bit more acceptable to people. Next, please. And how is the fast food industry a byproduct of military's food and innovation technology efforts? Well, anything that's convenient, processed, packaged, and will have a longer shelf life is good for the soldiers, right? And once you actually set up all the manufacturing facilities, once the war is ended, what do? You turn those products onto your citizens, and you ensure that you brand them and turn them into McNuggets. Next slide, please. The World War II campaign actually started with organ meats, and it was very successful. At the end of the war, Americans were eating 50% more offal, which is basically organ meats, as they were eating before. So a ton of money, and a lot of anthropologists, including Margaret Mead, headed that team. Next, please. And here we have a long list. Spam, turkey jerky, U.S. Army's Forever Pizza, McNuggets, all of these you can give credit to the U.S. military for. Next, please. And it's not just the food. It's also certain key channel and store formats like a drive-through. These were experimented with, especially for the U.S. military in 1975. Next, please. But how do these tropes of masculinity, meat, and military get away with so much? Lizzie Collingham says, the global wars have made it worse. Wartime food shortages substitutes primed a population to value abundance, essentially scale and instant gratification, I guess, and accept reduced quality ingredients. Next, please. But fear not, the resistance is here. Real men eat plants. Real men are powered by compassion. Real men lean in and are not afraid to be vulnerable, and much more than will fit on the slide. But as I said, is it too late? Will centuries of Carnist colonialist greed get the better of our species? And are the planetary boundaries breached and too far gone? Thank you so much, everyone. It has been a pleasure presenting to you. Katrina.
Thank you so much, Nivi. What a fascinating topic. And I know you can probably make that an even longer one. So if people want to follow you, obviously check out the Virsa Foundation and JIVINITI research. You can find all that information in the program for this event. But that was amazing. Thank you so much, Nivi. You're awesome.
Thank you so much, Katrina. And thank you, Global Veg Fest.